There is Field Yates of ESPN. Phil, good to see you, man.
What's going on, Mike? How are you, my friend? Good to catch up as always.
I know. I mean, you haven't. This is a new look for me. This beard. I don't know how long this is going to go. Girlfriend's not a fan of it, but
what? Why not?
Well, I mean, I looked more like, and I know you're a Boston guy like me. I always looked like Paul Pierce. If I ever tried to grow one back in the day, look like the Etch-a-Sketch. So start off as lazy, and then now,
you got listen, I'm going to get up and close and personal. I've been shaving a week, and this is all I got. So you're doing better than I am with that Paul Pierce looking beard right there.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know how long it's going to last. And I will say before we get going, we've known each other for 10 years. And one thing that I'm very, very proud to say, I have never asked you for any fantasy football advice.
You can ask away whenever you want. Fire away. I only have a couple of ground rules. I guess there's one rule more so than anything else is, let's just say the great Mike Yuba says, hey, I got some questions here. I need a choice between, I'm just going to make this up, Terry McLaurin and Tyler Lockett this week. If you ask and my answer is I got McLaurin, and you then respond, really? Or how come? Or are you sure? Then we stop. Because here's the deal. We're getting peppered with these questions left and right all day, every day. I don't have time to give you a TED talk about why I prefer Terry McLaurin to Tyler Lockett. Sometimes it's I could spell it out for you very clearly. Other times it's my gut call. And if you're going to ask, I hope that you're asking not because you want confirmation of your own thoughts, but because you want my thoughts, and you'll use them to help inform your decision. But I know that if you ever have a fantasy football question, please feel free to fire away.
Yeah, you can catch Field on Fantasy Focus. You guys probably tune into that on Sundays. I know that this is a college state. Some fans will, lean towards the Carolina Panthers. Some will just, gravitate towards whatever. So, again, Field, obviously, you got to go to when it comes to fantasy football, but you've also been very locked in, again, for over a decade when it comes to the draft. And I know you put a tweet out a couple weeks ago that got a lot of Gamecock fans excited, because it's one thing if one of the local guys like myself or someone else says, man, Xavier Legette, like, man, what a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
He's doing. Okay. I knew this was going to happen. Is Lockett too risky to start right now?
JP.
Fantasy questions now.
Yeah, but, JP, the answer is no. Good matchup this weekend.
But you put a tweet out just talking about what you've seen with Xavier. And I think for so many of us that have followed his journey, never mind the fact of what he's done on the field. I mean, he has a phenomenal background story, everything that he's gone through, if you haven't heard about that, Field. But his size, his speed, the numbers he's putting up, I just mentioned before you hopped on, he has a chance to become the 5th Gamecock in program history to eclipse 1,000 yards receiving in a season, just 27 yards away. You have Alshon Jeffrey on that list, Sidney Wright twice, Sterling Sharp, Pharaoh Cooper, so some pretty elite company. For you, though, what is it about Legette, as you've continued to watch more about him, that really just stands out? Because, again, I think the size and speed speaks for itself, but I don't know if there's anything else.
The size and speed definitely is a starting point. And as you think about how players are going to be evaluated in the pre-draft process, and then when where or when they'll end up being drafted once we get to late April, I think you have to remember that in the NFL, the size and speed combination are always going to prevail, right? Because if you're an NFL team and you're trying to decide who should we be taking, you are always sort of examining the possibility of that player reaching his top outcome. And the top outcome for a guy who's 6'2", 225 pounds and can run like the wind, like XL, is probably higher than the same outcome for a guy who's 5'11", 195 pounds and can run fast, but maybe can't run with that same level of power and speed combination that you're getting from Xavier. So he has this unique combination of size and speed that we've been talking about, but his body control is just sick. There have been a couple of plays this year where it's almost like he goes up and he can time a jump perfectly on one play and then high point the football, which is a very difficult thing to defend when you're his size. If you're reaching the ball at its highest point, it's just tough to come down with a pass breakup or even force an incompletion, no matter who you are on defense. But there have been a couple of plays where it almost feels like he's mistiming his jump, but he can just hover and gravitate above air and find a way to come down with the football. And he's so good after the catch, right? one of the best receivers in the NFL, not the very best in the NFL in terms of run after catch skills, is a fellow Gamecock and Deebo Samuel. These two
Mhm.
guys are very different, size, stature for sure. But Xavier's so good with the ball in his hands after the catch that he's going to be a very, very highly drafted player.
I don't know how much you've had an opportunity to talk with different teams, scouts about Xavier in particular, but I think one of the more impressive things, I mentioned that list, right? I mean, you have some phenomenal wide receivers, Elshon, Sterling, some of
Yep.
the receivers that have been able to eclipse that 1,000-yard mark in a season at USC. I think to me, what stands out the most is Leggett didn't have the numbers during the last 4 seasons, COVID year, so he has a 5th season to
Yeah.
play. Last season, he only had 167 yards in total. In the 4 years combined heading into this year, he had 423. I mean, just last week, he put up over 200. It was named
Yeah.
a co-national player of the week from an offensive standpoint. So I bring those things up because how much of what a player is doing towards the end of their career impacts more so with their draft stock in comparison to maybe the entire body of work.
Well, it's a good reminder, Mike, that we are projecting these players, right? There are guys throughout the college game that the production is not what would strike you as like first round pick or top 50 pick or first 2 day pick, but the traits are. And that's kind of the golden rule from my scouting days. And it got hammered over the head a million times over to me. We draft traits, we don't draft production, right? Now, traits usually lead to production. So if a guy's very productive, he usually has some pretty darn good traits. But there are some circumstances in which the system is set up in a certain way, or a certain team in college only has one receiver, so that receiver picks up all the catches and the yards. But for Xavier, like what you saw the first 4 years was probably not nearly as refined of a player as we're seeing right now. The production obviously was nowhere close to what it is right now, but there were some of those traits. Like he didn't all of a sudden go from 5'8" to 6'2" from last season to this year. But it's a good reminder that you are projecting these players, and you got to dig deeper than just what the stats may tell you. So his breakout is. I'm trying to think of other players. There are a handful of players that probably strike as in that same category of like breakout players this year. Jonah Ellis from Utah has been unbelievable. He's up to 11 and a half sacks, second most in the nation. Dallin Holker is a tight end in Colorado State who was at BYU until recently, kind of went from a unproductive tight end to a finalist for the John Mackey Award, which goes to the best tight end in college football. I mean, there's a handful of guys that have had that same trajectory as Xavier this season, but it certainly like you didn't have to, or you don't have to now pound the table as strongly as you did last year if you were a believer in Xavier because the proof's in the pudding. So I think the guys that come on late, I don't know that necessarily like catapults them up the board faster, but it definitely gives scouts that much more of an argument to make towards their general manager or their head coach about why you should be taking a player like Excel.
Yeah, you talk about projections, and I want to obviously get into Spencer Rattler, but another guy I do want to bring up because unfortunately he's been banged up. Xavier Leggett has took the torch and he's run with it. Is
Yeah.
Juice Wells, and there was obviously a lot of hype about this guy even coming out of James Madison, and we haven't been able to really see him out there other than that nice flash that he showed during that Georgia game where he scored the touchdown, which unfortunately was the same play he got hurt on. For a guy like that, again, obviously he's going up, 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 and I know you keep like saying it's a projection because he's been banged up. I want you to kind of put your agent hat on. I know you're not an agent, but if you were an agent, never mind the fact that you have NIL and everything else now with college football, what do you think would be in the best interest of Juice Wells without knowing, obviously, from a family standpoint, all that, but in terms of just talking football, and obviously he wants to be drafted as high as possible, and the
Yeah.
injury this season certainly will plague that if he decides to go into the draft this year, I'm sure.
There are a lot of factors. Let's start with this, the depth of the class. Right now, if you were to ask me the strongest position in the entire 2024 NFL draft, it's wide receiver. It's not close. There might be 10, 15 guys that go in the first 75 picks. That's how good of a class it is. So you have to ask yourself, I might be one of the most talented guys in the country, but if I'm the 12th receiver off the board, I don't go to pick 71. Is that worth it? Or do I bet on myself, come back for an extra year, make that NIL money, which offsets, the money you're not making in the NFL, and then come back and be maybe the 7th receiver next year in the draft, maybe the first receiver in the draft next year. So that's a part of it. I think part of it's your comfort level with a quarterback that's going to be in place next year that's going to replace Spencer Rattler. There's all kinds of sort of components to go into this decision. But it's layered, it's complicated, and I think what I've realized, Mike, in my years of doing this is that I don't really want to judge these kids on what they decide to do or not to do because pretty rarely do I have the full story. So I understand both sides of the argument, and I will sort of support the athlete, in almost every case, no matter which way he decides to go.
Well, I'll give you another part of the story, which is a good one, at least for Juice Wells, unless something has changed over the last couple of weeks that I'm not aware of. He is I think he's got the most NIL deals in the SEC. So
Is that
not
right?
bad. Yeah. So, and that was prior to the injury. Again,
Yeah.
I mean, if someone has surpassed him over the last couple of weeks, he's still one of the top. So
Sure.
point being is with the NIL money, I mean, he's doing all right. I know that for a fact. Something that's interesting, though, before we get into Spencer, and you could throw Juice Wells in there. I'm sure he would get invited to a Senior Bowl, but because of the change now, starting this year, and I don't know how much you've really thought about this. I think some people might not even know what the heck I'm talking about. Yesterday was announced that they're going to have essentially an upperclassmen bowl. Like these games are going to be open to upperclassmen. It's not just going to be limited to seniors. And I bring that up not just specifically about Juice, but I think back to 2014, and you'll remember this bowl game. South Carolina people might remember. It doesn't exist anymore. 2014 Medal of Honor Bowl. And a player that stands out to me was Malcolm Butler. To me, and I've had a chance to cover Malcolm in Mississippi. Well, obviously, he's playing New England that year, but he's from Mississippi. I work in Mississippi. Later that following year, we crossed paths, and he told me how much the Medal of Honor Bowl truly helped him be able to show that he can cover SEC talent and whatever. So I bring that up because certainly there's going to be juniors that will come in and have an opportunity to play in these bowl games. So you might have one of those fringe guys like a Malcolm Butler not having an opportunity to play in one of these Senior Bowls. And I really haven't put my opinion on it, which, I think there's still some good in with it, what they're trying to do. But I bring that up because how much could that impact some of these players, some of these fringe guys? Again, I don't know if that would impact Juice Wells specifically if he were to decide, but it's just one of those things I've been thinking over the last 24 hours since the news came out.
I think what would be interesting is how many of these juniors actually make the decision to declare and jump to one of these all-star games. Because in recent years, what we've seen from the Senior Bowl is while they get some of the best players in the country, you're still getting some of these upper tier seniors that are choosing not to attend the all-star games because how much more is there for them to prove, right? So I don't know if juniors will take a similar approach. Will a Caleb Williams decide that he needs to go to a bowl game, or will he say, you know what, I'm going to take that extra 7 days and work on my pre-draft prep? I'd like to tell you that I had a good feel for it, but because it's uncharted territory, I don't know what it's going to look like. But it's very fascinating. I have not spoken to either of the directors of the bowl games, the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Game, Jim Nagy or Eric Galko, about how much awareness they had about this decision and whether they had already begun the process of accumulating their potential underclassmen invites. But I'll be fascinated to see if this year is at all emblematic of what it's going to look like in future years, or if this year it's going to be just a handful of juniors / underclassmen, and then next year it's going to explode, where basically it becomes the if you're eligible invitational.
Yeah, just like anything, right? NIL, transfer portal, it's all
brave new world.
uncharted territory. Yeah. And Jim, I think, put a tweet out yesterday saying something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, that, he had a inkling that it could happen. So maybe they started to put a board together of some of those juniors. But again, what does the final roster look like? Before we wrap things up, Spencer Rattler.
Yeah.
Here's a guy that before he arrived at South Carolina, lots made about this Netflix show. And I can tell you, Field, from covering the young man, obviously I was back up in Boston last year with your good friend, Mike Reese, who I'm convinced he is the nicest person in the world. Working with him on Patriots fifth quarter and the pregame show, he's the type of guy that if he had a dog, right, and you ran over his dog, he'd probably find a way to turn around like, well, the dog was old anyway. Like, don't worry about it. Like, nicest guy in the world. But
nicest man ever. Yeah.
Having said all that, between my interactions with Spencer, since I've been back, even before that, he is one of the nicest people that
Yeah.
you would ever meet. You talk to players off record and they tell you like, man, like this guy is a leader. He's a tremendous teammate. And then obviously you see the play out there, despite the fact that they've been playing musical chairs up front on the offensive line and he's been getting killed in some of these games. What have you heard just about what Rattler has done from a stock standpoint? I think it was Jim Nagy. Speaking about Jim, I think he's put some things out lately over the last couple of weeks saying how impressed he's been with Rattler. But how about yourself?
Leadership's been A plus from Spencer. I mean, he has been as exemplary of a leader for a program as you could be during a season that admittedly has not gone as anybody wanted it to be. I mean, 3-6, 1-5 in the SEC. I'm not, naive to how much that is not sitting well with various Gamecock fans around the area and around the country. But Spencer has been awesome as a leader. He's been so competitive. I think that what it comes down to for Spencer is when you're not one of those first round quarterbacks, which I do not project Spencer to be. What I think it comes down to is, at some point, once you get past, let's call it the first like 45, 50, maybe even 60 picks in the draft, you're not taken as a quarterback. The range from there on out is very dependent upon how you do in the pre-draft process, because that's the chance that teams get to learn about who you are as a human. And it's going to be the intangibles. It's going to be the dependability. It's going to be the interview skills. It's going to be the sharpness on the grease board, so to speak. It's going to be the intellect. It's going to be the processing, the decision making, things that are in some ways studyable, if I can make up a word, on film, but in some ways the kind of things that you learn when you're spending time with an individual. So some teams may say to themselves, hey, we think Spencer Rattler is a third round pick because he's a developmental number 2 quarterback who could start for us in a pinch. Other teams may say, hey, the size is a concern to us, or whatever it might be. We view him as more like a 5th round pick. So the range, I imagine, will be pretty wide, depending on which teams you talk to about Spencer during the pre-draft process. But I expect him to be, if not invited, definitely if not attending, definitely invited to one of the All-Star games. And I think he'll have a chance to show some of the natural skills that at one point, early in even in his Oklahoma days, had us wondering whether this could be a future first-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a fan for sure. There's a lot to like about his game.
And obviously, at the end of the day, it's about production. And I bring that up because when you start to peel back the layers and you're looking at some of the little things, right? And I say little things, they could be bigger things in the eyes of some of these teams. But one thing that really stands out to me is the fact that at least this year, I mean, I know he's been talking about musical chairs. He's gone through so many different OCs between going from Oklahoma to South Carolina, Marcus Satterfield last year at OC, and now he has Dal Loggins, a guy that has plenty of experience of coaching in the NFL as an offensive coordinator.
That matters.
And Dal mentioned yesterday just some of the things he's been working on with Spencer. And it's not just what's going on the field, but how you talk to the media, just little things like that. How much can that help sometimes? The fact that he's been working, he's had a chance to work with an NFL OC. Again, obviously, can you get the job done? Can the production be there? I'm sure is the most important thing. But again, peeling back those layers, having the opportunity to work with an NFL OC, can that only help him?
Totally. Yeah, the reality for a quarterback is whether especially when you're the starter, but in general, you're a CEO of the company. And so when you've got people that are shining the light bright on you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's not just how you play on the field. Is how do you comport yourself off the field? How do you handle yourself publicly? What do you do in times of adversity? What do you do when perhaps others aren't doing their job at a satisfactory level? Do you point fingers? Do you point the thumb? What do you do? How do you handle yourself? So I think that the experience with Dowell this year will end up being valuable for Spencer, who I just think he's going to end up being one of those players that no matter where he gets drafted, he'll start a few games at some point in his career. And we're going to say, oh, yeah, I remember that kid. I remember why he was so highly touted at one point during his college career. So I'm a fan. And if you're a team that is looking for a number 2 quarterback in this year's draft, I think that Spencer Rattler certainly fits the bill.
And Field, I'll leave you with this. I don't know how familiar you are with Debo Williams on defense, but I think he could be a steal. I mean, I think back a couple of years ago, I don't want to compare players, but I remember when Ernest Jones was coming out and he went under the radar, and it feels like, I know he wasn't active last week for the Rams, but I think outside of last week and then one other game this season, he's led the Rams in tackles every friggin' week.
Been awesome.
Helped them in the Super Bowl year.
I'm a fan of some of the guys on defense. I think that TJ Sanders, we'll see if he declares or not, but if he does, he will not have to wait long for his name to be called, because That guy is all sorts of freaky and long and disruptive and a real terror to block on the interior of that defensive line.
Well, Field, appreciate you hopping on today. Gamecock
Mike,
fans, check them out. Fantasy Focus. I mean, you're on so many friggin' shows now. I can't even keep up anymore, man. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you, Mike. Right back to you, my friend. I appreciate your loyalty and your trust for all these years. A decade plus, we were getting old, man. Let's try to pull a little Benjamin Button, age in reverse here going forward.
You say that, and I mean, the hair, and I know you get this a good bit. I mean, what's the secret, though? I mean, I wish
I was going to say, you got good layers. I don't,
it's going back a little bit, though. It just starts to go back. Just like one of our coworkers, Wes Mitchell. I don't know if he's on listening. You two, the hairline just doesn't go back.
Yeah, I honestly, I wish there was more of a secret other than I go to the barber a lot.
Hey, you know what? You deserve it, though. Field
My
Yates
20 minutes of peace and quiet during the week.
Hey, before I let you go, one of your colleagues is actually going to be joining us next week. At least we've been texting about it. She hasn't officially said it's going to work, but Alyssa Lang. You've had a chance to be able to work with Alyssa, and this fan base, they love Alyssa. And Alyssa's actually, I don't know if you know this, she actually used to work for Gamecock Central back in the day.
Yeah, Alyssa, of course, a proud SC grad, the GOAT, the best. Love Alyssa. She's absolutely incredible. She's great at her job. She loves football, obsessed with all sports, really. She's great. Her soon-to-be husband, Trevor, is one of my good buddies as well. They are an awesome, awesome, awesome family. So I'm glad you did this week. And tell her this, because if you had Alyssa on prior to me, I would just say no thanks, Mike, because that's a tough act to follow right there.
Well, it worked out. Appreciate you hopping on this week. And again, listen to Field Yates when it comes. There was so many of them. I didn't start putting them up. People started asking. I knew it was going to happen. But Field, appreciate you hopping on, man.
Sounds good, bud. Talk to you soon.